Ladies and gentlemen, there's one small problem. As you probably heard, I was educated in Afrikaans, although I was baptized Peter Edwards, and my great-great-grandfather was captured by the British on the 27th of August, 1900. His grandfather arrived in the 1850s in Cape Town, John Henry Edwards, my father's name, and for some reason married a van der Merwe. And since then, the Edwards family was Afrikaans. On my mother's side, the first Maxon, Richard William, he was a British Marine, also arrived in the 1850s at Knysna. He was on his way to Australia and for some reason married a local girl, and they remained English. But my grandfather, Richard William Maxon, for some reason married a Otto girl, and she belonged to an English church. He converted to the Dutch Reformed Church. And to cut a long story short, my father, John Henry Edwards, or Jannie, joined the Union Defence Force in 1940, and he married my mother in his uniform in 1942 in Somerset West. And the fact that he wore his uniform at the marriage didn't go down too well with my grandfather, Richard William Maxon, because he was a staunch nationalist. So you see, I've got a complicated background. This morning, my wife sent me a WhatsApp. My pa draai in sy graf om. And that refers to the fact that when I met my future father-in-law, he passed away about 12 years ago, he gave me a look because of my surname, Edwards. Now, you must understand where he comes from. His father served with the vet, and he was captured, sent overseas. His mother was the only survivor of a family of 6 that went to the Standerton concentration camp. So he had a thing about this guy with an English name, Peter Edwards, marrying his daughter. So fortunately, I could convince him that my great-grandfather fought in the Anglo-Boer War, but I didn't mention that my father served in the Union Defence Force in the Second World War. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the opportunity to address you about a part of South African history which for various reasons is close to my heart, namely the Anglo-Boer War and especially the so-called Kruger Millions. I must confess that I never paid much attention to the so-called Kruger Millions, but until recently I had the opportunity to visit the most important archives in Britain and, of course, South Africa, and could do some research on the most important documents on British and Boer side concerning the Anglo-Boer War. Now, it was not about the Kruger Millions. I want to state that very clearly. And as my friend who sits here in front just asked me, is jy 'n skattejagter? Ek is nie 'n donderse skattejagter nie. And you'll understand at the end of my lecture. Now, my field of study was the role of Delagoa Bay, Lorenzo Marx, in the years preceding the Anglo-Boer War, and then obviously I've been doing research, the role of Lorenzo Marx during the Anglo-Boer War. But in the course of my research, I had to go through all these documents, and that sort of tickled my imagination or interest about the so-called Kruger Millions. So consequently, I enthusiastically accepted the opportunity to deliver the memorial lecture of our Friends of the War Museum in Pretoria earlier this year at Melrose House. And some of you attended that lecture. Rudy, I know you were there that day. And you will remember that I attempted for about an hour to offer documentary proof, which I will also show you today, of course, that the Kruger millions did not exist. And I felt quite satisfied with my lecture, because during the lecture I could see a few people who I know knows a lot about history nodding their heads as if agreeing with me. So when question time arrived, I was full of confidence. And then this happened, notwithstanding my best efforts, there was a person in the audience who claimed to have designed a machine which could trace minerals up to a few hundred meters under the Earth's surface. He further claimed to have identified a few spots in Pretoria where treasure was indeed buried. He merely wanted to know from me where the necessary authorization could be acquired to start his search. So much for my lecture. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, for the purpose of this lecture, I have decided to change my strategy and tell you where the real Kruger millions can be found. Right, let's start with an introduction. During and after the Anglo-Boer War, there were rumors circulating about hidden treasures in the form of gold bars and gold pounds of the old Transvaal Republic, or South African Republic, that were said to have been removed shortly before the British entered Pretoria and then disappeared somewhere in the bush of the Eastern Transvaal Lowveld. Such rumors sound terrible romantic. They fire the imagination, and many people believe them. Although we have long known that such treasures in fact never existed, the fact remains that a considerable amount of gold was removed on the eve of the occupation of a Transvaal capital by Lord Roberts' army in June 1900. Much has been speculated about the circumstances in which this happened, about the destination of the gold, and about its later fate. But because the truth about it was never made public, so many legends arose that the time has now come to reveal the facts. Ladies and gentlemen, these are not my words, but the words of a renowned South African historian, D.W. Kruger, in the introduction to his groundbreaking study, Die Kruger Miljoene, which appeared in 1979, 46 years ago. On the dust jacket of the same book, the following: since the Anglo-Boer War, South Africa has had its tales about the Kruger millions. People have dug, burrowed, and searched in all four corners of a Transvaal. As recently as 1978, a national road was nearly undermined because a particular spot was pointed out as the place where the mysterious, beguiling treasure had supposedly been kept all these years. But nothing. Still, these mysterious millions elude people. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of my lecture. Since the publication of the Kruger Miljoene nearly half a century ago, little has changed. Rumors about the treasure of a Kruger million still appear. As recently as a month ago, during a visit to Machadodorp as part of the Friends of the War Museum tour, a resident informed me about the latest digging on their farm. And you will be surprised if you Google the words Kruger millions, not to mention the many YouTube videos. I refrain from any comment. The purpose of this lecture is therefore to give you the facts about the circumstances surrounding the removal of a gold from Pretoria to Machadodorp on Monday, 4 June 1900, a day before the British entry into Pretoria and its subsequent fate. In other words, what became of a gold that was removed from Pretoria on 4 June 1900 and delivered to President Kruger at Machadodorp roughly 14 hours later. Ladies and gentlemen, there underneath that red arrow, that is the building from where the gold was removed. And for those of you who are not familiar with Church Square, oops. Oh. Oh. No. Oh, yeah, okay. Thank you. Of course, the Kruger statue, Palace of Justice, the Mint, National Bank, but the most important building, ladies and gentlemen, the Old Raadsaal. And there on that corner, that office, is where the government of a republic sat, the Raad, Executive Council, and right next to it was the office of the State Secretary. By the way, the Kruger statue have been in the news the past couple of days. I won't refer to that. But if you look in which direction Wimpole is looking, you will see it's to the north. At the end, I'll come back to that because that's, in my opinion, and I've got the facts to prove it, he's facing in the wrong direction. But that's a discussion for a little bit later. Right, the purpose of this lecture is therefore to give you the facts about the circumstances surrounding the removal of the gold from Pretoria to Machadodorp on Monday, 4 June, day before the British entry in Pretoria, and its subsequent fate. In other words, what became of the gold that was removed from Pretoria on 4 June 1900. I hope that my lecture will give you the necessary facts and perspective to assess any article, book, documentary, YouTube video, or whatever else about the Kruger Millions at its true worth. Ladies and gentlemen, the content of my lecture is based on the following sources. On the left-hand side, the Kruger Millions by D.W. Kruger. This book, based on archival research, remains the only authoritative work on the Kruger Millions, and I can recommend it without any reservation. And then right next to it, you see, in my opinion, perhaps the most valuable papers in the archives concerning the Kruger Millions, and it's still there. That is Eduard Meyer's account of the removal of a gold from Pretoria, the train journey to Machadodorp, and his activities there with the disbursement of the gold. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is not well known, but Meyer was a young official in the Treasury Department whose eyewitness report, remember, eyewitness report on the removal of a gold on Monday, 4 June 1900, is of extreme value. His report was confirmed by General Smuts in 1949, and a copy was deposited in the State Archives in Pretoria. The good news is that you can still consult it in the State Archives. The bad news is that Meyer did not draw a map of where the gold is buried. Right, and of course, my own research, ladies and gentlemen, when our society spoke about the Kruger millions and a lecture, I immediately volunteered because in the course of my research, I had to go through all the state documents, and I literally came upon, I won't say 100 of documents, but quite a lot, nearly 100 documents that confirm the story that Meyer and other people told about the disbursement of a Kruger millions. My lecture falls into three parts. That's just the writing, what it says there, korrespondensie tussen meneer E. Meyer, welkom Goebawe Suidwes-Afrika, Dr. Coles, Onderste Poort, en die hoofarchivaris met kommentaar deur generaal J.C. Smits in sake die Kreermiljoene en Dr. Gustav Preller se artikel daaroor uit die Star, September 1931. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please don't ask me about this article of Dr. Gustav Preller, because it's a load of bull dust. There's a better word for it. We can speak afterwards about that. Right, and there's Meyer's own handwriting. You can see the date, 3rd September 1951. Right, that brings us back to Church Square. As I've said, my lecture falls into three parts. The first one is the removal of the gold from Pretoria. And ladies and gentlemen, if you ever go or have the opportunity to visit Church Square, that is that building and the one right next to it, the Mint and the State Bank. That's the two most important buildings. Can I see, is there anyone in the audience who grew up in Pretoria during the 1960s? There's only Professor Frans Johan. Okay. But just as a point of interest, I grew up, and of course, the best thing on a Saturday, if there wasn't any rugby at Loftus Versfeld, was to take the bus from Sunnyside to Church Square, and we would get off here, run underneath that balcony, and right there, that building was a Capitol Theatre. And then some days there was an age restriction, so we couldn't attend that, so we'd walk down just about on that corner, the 20th century. And I never realized all those years, passing the old Raadsaal, the Western Facade, the Mint, National Bank, Palace of Justice, you know, what wonderful events occurred on Church Square. But so, if you ever pay a visit to Church Square, you should stand at attention at one of those buildings. Right, ladies and gentlemen, after my lecture, I hope you'll realize that the myth of the Kruger millions is actually the tale of 4 train rides. And if you just remember that today, that will serve you well. About the first 3 have been well documented, but not the final one. Right, let's start with the removal of a gold from Pretoria between 28 May and 4 June 1900. I will not spend time on the challenges that Lord Roberts' advance to Johannesburg at the end of May 1900 posed to the Transvaal government in Pretoria, but will rather concentrate on the events surrounding Kruger's flight from Pretoria and the removal of a gold on 4 June 1900. On Monday, 28th of May, the Transvaal government decided that the capital would not be defended and that the government should withdraw to Machadodorp, about 220 kilometers east of Pretoria. The most important officials caught the train to Machadodorp that same day. The next day, 29th of May, Tuesday, the 29th of May, would become one of the bitterest days in Paul Kruger's life. When Lord Roberts broke through the Boer positions south of Johannesburg, it was decided that Kruger must leave Pretoria without delay. The necessary railway carriages were readied, Kruger's saloon car in which he would sleep, a council chamber where the government would meet, an office for the telegraphist, and a dining room, kitchen, and bathroom. While Kruger's close family helped him pack, on the afternoon of the 29th of May, a young American boy, Jimmy Smith, and his party arrived at the presidential residence to convey, on behalf of thousands of school children in Philadelphia, their compassion with the Boers, and to present a vierkleur made in the USA to a deeply moved Kruger. Kruger makes special mention of this gesture in his memoirs, saying it meant a great deal to him in his dark hour. After the young Americans had departed, by the way, it's not Kruger standing next to Jimmy Smith, it's the State Secretary, F.W. Reitz, but that's the afternoon of the 29th of May. After the young Americans had departed, Kruger called his family together in the sitting room and prayed for the safekeeping of those who were staying behind and for the Lord's help and guidance in the unknown that lay ahead. Thereafter, Paul and Gesina went to the bedroom to take leave of each other. Gesina was already so weakened that she clearly would not have survived the hardships and strain of a journey eastwards. The two old people must have realized that this might be their final farewell. Gesina came out of the room with red, tear-stained eyes, leaning on her husband and companion of more than half a century, and murmured, "It is the will of God, and my prayer is that He will keep you." Kruger merely looked at her for a quiet moment, turned around, and walked away to the waiting carriage. He would never see her again. It was already dark, and the lanterns on either side of a coachman had been lit when Kruger and his party departed for Eerste Fabrieke, from where they traveled at night on the Eastern Line to Middelburg. Now, you might wonder why from Eerste Fabrieke and not from Pretoria Station. The reason is Manie Bredell, the Commissioner of Police, and Kruger's private secretary, feared incidents if a president were to depart from Pretoria Station. In addition to Bredell, the president's private secretary, the party consisted of Frikkie Eloff, the president's grandson, serving as a kind of second private secretary, Dr. Heymans, Kruger's personal physician, and the Hollander Happe, Kruger's valet. Several officials will join them later. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we get to the beginning of the myth regarding the Kruger millions. Kruger's quiet withdrawal to Machadodorp at night would lead to a persistent rumor that he fled the capital like a thief in the night with a large quantity of gold. The reality, however, as previously seen, was very different. That's, of course, Middelburg Station, but there's a beautiful photograph in the program, and I think you will visit Middelburg Station later this afternoon. Right, now we come to Wednesday, the 30th of May. Upon arriving at Middelburg Station, Kruger sent 3 telegrams to Pretoria. The first one to Treasurer General Isaac Malherbe. "I request you to come here immediately with all the gold and money. Telegraph to me your time of departure and answer me on this. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this telegram is proof that Kruger did not flee with the gold. The second telegram to the head of a telegraph services, C.K. van Trotsenburg. Please inform Mrs. Kruger and State Attorney Smuts that I am departing for Machadodorp, where we intend to fight to the end. And the third telegram to the director of the government printing works. I deem it necessary that you come up to Machadodorp without delay with one of your presses and equipment, where our seat of government will be established in order to publish the necessary proclamations. Right. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to Thursday, the 31st of May, back in Pretoria. In Pretoria, State Attorney Smuts was left behind with General Schalk Burger to represent the government and maintain order. It was, of course, also necessary to delay the British force, which occupied Johannesburg on the 31st of May, and thus to prevent the reserve ammunition and the government's money and gold reserves from falling into enemy hands. Schalk Burger, I want to say typically, soon disappeared from the scene to ensure his family's safety, so that Smuts remained in command alone. He could act only in his capacity as state attorney and did not even have a regular police force at his disposal. Now followed 3 days during which the Boers were on the brink of throwing in the towel and making peace. And then there would never have been any talk of a Kruger millions. And those 3 days, Professor Frans Johan spoke about yesterday. Between Wednesday, the 30th of May, and Saturday, the 2nd of June, several councils of war were held, during which the mood about whether to continue fighting fluctuated greatly. And ladies and gentlemen, for the sake of time, I will not go into detail. Professor Pretorius gave you a very good description yesterday. This brings us to Friday, the 1st of June. Remember, on the Wednesday, Kruger asked for the gold and money to be sent to Machadodorp. Now it's Friday. Late on the morning of the 1st of June, a council of war took place in the old Raadsaal on Church Square. According to Smuts, only he, Louis Botha, and perhaps 1 or 2 other officers had seen the telegrams from President Kruger Steyn at that point. Even so, the younger officers, including Captain Dani Tron, were fired up to continue fighting. Now, I'm not going to repeat what Professor Pretorius told you yesterday. Just to remind you, it was decided by 29 votes to 14 to continue the war. And ladies and gentlemen, we might speculate with relish about how the further course of a war would have gone if the council had decided otherwise. One thing is certain, there would have been no rumors of the Kruger millions. Right, this brings us to Saturday, the 2nd of June. And this brings us to the testimony about the removal of a golden coin from Pretoria by Eduard Meyer, a young accountant of the Mint. On Saturday, the 2nd of June, when the Mint was closed, now in those days it closed on Saturdays at about 1 o'clock, for the weekend, and the English had already advanced to near the Jukskei River, their entry into the undefended city was expected within days. To Meyer's surprise, no preparations were made that Saturday to remove the gold from the Mint and bring it to safety in time. When Meyer asked at closing time why the gold had not also been sent eastwards, Mint Master Perrin claimed that he had received no instructions and that they should submit to the new authority. So by Saturday, 1 o'clock, ladies and gentlemen, All the gold was still safely in the National Bank. Right. Only a few hundred burghers had tried up to the morning of the 4th of June to delay the advancing enemy, with a view to removing the remaining coin and gold reserves and the enormous reserves of ammunition. A delay of at least a few hours was essential, for without these means there could be virtually no continuation of the war. It was Smuts' special task to ensure this. Throughout the Sunday, enemy cannon fire could be heard, and on Monday morning, the 4th of June, skirmishes were already underway at 6 Mile Spruit. That's more or less where the present Irene is situated. The British occupation of Pretoria was imminent when Meyer arrived at the Mint at 7 a.m. on Monday morning, almost at the same time as Perrant and the Mint clerk P. Callahan. Usually at that time, the Mint metal was distributed to the various departments and the people set to work, while the administrative clerks went home for breakfast until 9 o'clock. That morning, Perrin ordered the furnaces lit. He had the gold weighed out to the foremen of the various Mint departments as if nothing unusual were happening. In other words, business as usual. Not wanting to argue again as on Saturday, Meyer waited until Perrin went home and warned the smelter and refiner not to put the gold into the crucibles nor into the acid, but to wait until instructions were received from State Attorney Smuts. Meyer then rode on horseback to Smuts' residence in Sunnyside in Perrin's absence. And now that residence, ladies and gentlemen, is right next to Sunnyside Primary School, Berkeley Square. There he found the state attorney at the breakfast table. When he heard of a situation at the Mint, Smuts exclaimed in surprise, "What, is the gold there not long gone?" He ordered Meyer to return immediately and wait for his arrival. Smuts arrived shortly before 9 o'clock, and after an heated exchange of words with Perrin and Hugo, the manager of a national bank who had also arrived, he acted swiftly. He gave instructions to the staff to gather the gold at once, weigh it, draw up the necessary lists, and pack the gold into chests, ready for transport to the railway station. While they set to work, he himself rushed to the station where he had a train prepared. He also had the 2 mule wagons, known as trolleys, take up position in front of a national bank, which was situated next to the State Mint on Church Square. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the 2 trolleys was parked there, but I must remind you, in those days there was still a church here on Church Square. Oh, and just as a matter of fact, you all know that famous photograph of the British occupation of Pretoria, and that in front of an old raadsaal, that is where that was taken of the British troop, and Roberts there on the balcony. Right. Right. While they set to work, Smuts rushed to the station where he had a train prepared. He also had 2 mule wagons, known as trolleys, take up position, oh, I've said that, in front of a national bank. Right. On a tip from General Botha, Smuts discovered another special fund of £25,000 at the National Bank, which a bank held for essential war expenses by the Commandant General. He took that along as well. In the meantime, the gold was weighed and inventoried under the supervision of the acting state mining commissioner, and this took some time. The gold at the mint consisted of bar gold of varying quality, minted gold of standard refinement in various stages of coinage. There were large quantities of blank pounds and also about 100,000 Kruger pounds with a 1900 date stamp. The total value of all the gold was nearly 750,000 pounds. In today's value, ladies and gentlemen, nearly 12 million pounds, almost 271 million rand. While the gold was inventoried, the impatient Smuts kept urging them on. The vanguard of the British Army had already approached the outskirts of a city, and there was a rumor that a mounted column was on its way from Johannesburg to cut the railway line east of Pretoria. It was already noon when they were ready for the gold to be loaded onto the trolleys. Someone had to accompany the cargo, and when Smuts looked around, Meyer volunteered. He had to sign in duplicate the list of the gold that had been drawn up and take one copy along for the Treasurer General Isaac Malherbe at Machado Dorp. Now, that's a photo of Pretoria Station. As you can see, that was the ambulance train arriving at Pretoria from Colenso, so it was taken about the 16th or 17th of December 1899. Right. At Pretoria Station, just before Pretoria Station, while a crowd of onlookers gathered, the gold was loaded and then escorted to the station by 2 armed burghers. Meyer himself followed in a carriage. He did not even have time to go and greet his family, and with only the clothes on his back and 20 pounds in his pocket, boarded the train. It consisted of a locomotive, 1 passenger coach, and the guard's van in which the gold was packed. So, ladies and gentlemen, there wasn't a train packed full of trucks, packed full of gold. All the gold that was taken was in the guard's van. An armed escort of 6 or 8 men took places with Meyer in the passenger coach. At the station, Smuts handed Meyer a briefcase which he had to deliver personally to the president at Machado Dorp. He also had to convey a personal message. At last the journey could begin, which would only end when the treasure had safely reached its destination. A few years after the war, General Smuts could record with satisfaction in his war memoirs, "It was always a comfort to me that this small amount of less than £500,000, now that's an error on his part, but that may be so, that less than £500,000 in gold and coin, which I succeeded in removing from Pretoria under the enemy's shells on that much troubled day, held out for 2 years against about 200 million sterling at the British Treasury. Nay, more than that, after that treasure had fulfilled its noble task during the war, and it continued to haunt the minds of a great British statesman and conjured up visions of millions hidden in the veld or secretly transported to Europe to supply the Boers with war material and the future national aspirations of the Afrikaners." Now we come to the train journey to Machado Dorp. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Pretorius showed you yesterday a similar picture. Just to remind you, today that's where Inisa is situated, and the train, I think all of you know about the Gautrain. Am I correct? Right. Now, the Gautrain goes like that. That's the old Delagoa Bay railway line. and that is Fort Klapperkop. Okay, so what I'm now going to describe to you is as the train took the bend to Sunnyside. Sunnyside is situated here. As the train rounded the bend to Sunnyside, British shrapnel burst to the left and right of the track. There was presumably someone on the nearest hill controlling the artillery fire with signals. The pace was increased and the train soon got out of range. There was also no mounted column to tear up the track further ahead. But the myth of the Kruger Millions began to gain further momentum due to the events at the Mint and the station. You must remember, ladies and gentlemen, Kruger left Pretoria on Tuesday night. That Wednesday, the rumor began to spread. Kruger has fled with the gold. Okay. We now know the gold was only removed on the Monday, but everybody in Pretoria gathered on Church Square, saw the gold being removed, saw it being taken to the station, and there the train departs and the British are firing shells at it. So that's where the myth gained momentum. Let's see how the second train journey went. Between Pretoria and Bronkhorstspruit, some stations were unmanned and deserted, and at a few places the driver had to adjust the signal levers himself and push wagons that obstructed the way onto sidings. By nightfall, the train steamed into Witbank. There was not anything to eat at the station except tins of Vienna sausages and lemonade. To the very curious people on the platform who asked for the latest war news, Meyer and his companions assured them that the guard's van contained ammunition for the government at Machadodorp. After a short stop, the journey eastwards continued. It was a bitterly cold night for Meyer and his men, as the escort too had been commandeered so quickly by Smuts that they had no chance to fetch warm coats. On empty stomachs, they felt the cold even more. At last, at 2 o'clock in the night, the train steamed into Machadodorp station. A number of Irish volunteers had a large fire going of sleepers on the station grounds next to the track, and the gold train came to a halt right beside it. The cheerful Irishmen refreshed the half-frozen train crew, who joined them by the fire, with hot coffee and boerbeskuit. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's no ways I'm believing that. That coffee part. Are there anybody of Irish descent in the room? Yeah, I think you'll agree with me. It must have been something stronger. And here, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the most important photographs of the war. This is Machadodorp, the station, and there you can see all those trains parked.
5 more minutes. You're going to have to speak.
You, okay. Okay. Right. Okay. Right. Okay. What I'll skip, ladies and gentlemen, is Meyer's conversation with Paul Kruger, etc., and tell you what happened to the gold there. Let's give you a contemporary photograph. This is how it looks today. And I want to thank Rudy van Wyk for coming out all the way from Middelburg about 2 months ago to take this photograph. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a must for you. If you ever pass Machadodorp, go and visit that place. Okay, what happened to the gold there? 3 things I think is of importance. The first one, it was an open secret that the gold was distributed to all the creditors of South Africa, the Transvaal government. So they came, some even as far as present-day Maputo, and they came to this station, and yeah, the station, the truck containing gold was more or less parked there. They came from everywhere in the Transvaal to claim their gold. The second part, about 50,000 pounds, was given to the Transvaal government. That was used up. And thirdly, amount of round about 10,000 pounds were transferred to President Steyn to continue the war. Right, ladies and gentlemen, yeah, I thought I had a bit more time. Okay, thank you. I just want to tell you this story of what happened, what Kruger said to Meyer when they arrived there. He said to him, now you hand it over to Treasurer General Isak Malherbe, and he was ably assisted by the Auditor General J.S. Maree. And they were assisted by two senior officials, Paul and Arthur de Villiers. So there's no question of that gold just lying there for 3 months. Okay, Meyer himself, ladies and gentlemen, stayed for the month to help with the disbursement of the gold. Meanwhile, the British Consul General in Lorenzo Marques, Captain Crowe, reported on the 22nd of June to Lord Salisbury the following: Kruger, Reitz, Treasurer General and Volksraad members are living in 13 railway carriages at Machadodorp. 3 last carriages contain 1 million British and Transvaal sovereigns and 5 million uncoined gold. Kruger is also signing notes. This message, ladies and gentlemen, by Crowe, confirmed that Kruger and the gold were indeed in Machadodorp. Right, after Meyer's departure, ladies and gentlemen, because the responsible officials, as well as others closely involved with the undertaking, could not foresee that it would later become a point of contention, they did not comment publicly on the matter. At the time, it was, in any event, a matter of trust, as is often the case with so many government activities. This could not, however, prevent all kinds of conjectures about consignments of gold for the administration of a government's financial affairs, and the gold practically took place in public at Machadodorp Station. Now, at the end of June, because of Machadodorp's merciless winter cold, Kruger moved on to Waterval Onder, 15 kilometers from Machadodorp, where he lived in a small house, now a museum called Krugerhof. And ladies and gentlemen, if you're in any way interested in South African history, and especially the Anglo-Boer War, you cannot pass Waterval Onder without paying a visit, not to Krugerhof, but paying a visit to the Wayside Inn. And they're not paying me to do this for them. But it's the most, you'll experience the most wonderful hospitality, and as a bonus, you'll be able to pay a visit to that museum. Professor Frans Johan showed you a photograph yesterday where Kruger is sitting on that stoop. There, ladies and gentlemen, one of the most important decisions in the Anglo-Boer War were made. So you must pay a visit to that place. Right, I'll hurry along. By the end of July, there's Kruger's saloon car at Waterval onder. By the end of July, Lord Roberts continued his advance eastward along the eastern line or Delagoa Bay Railway, occupied Middelburg, and in August 1900 advanced to near Belfast. In that vicinity at Bergendal, the last major positional battle of the war would take place between 21 and 27 August. Now, early on the 27th of August, Kruger at Waterval onder requested all the trains at Machadodorp with ammunition, gold, whatever, to come immediately down to Waterval onder because they had what I'll call a suspicion that the British will break through at Bergendal. That same evening, on the 27th of August, General Botha reported by telegraph to Kruger and President Steyn at Waterval onder on the outcome of the Battle of Bergendal and the British breakthrough. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that report took place the evening, and it is called in Afrikaans a draadgesprek, a telegraphic communication between the telegraph office at Waterval onder and the telegraph office at Machadodorp. I'm not going to dwell on that. That is Waterval onder. That is Kruger's house. There you see the Oubaas on the stoep with his guards. This is a transcript of that draadgesprek which took place the evening of the 27th of August. Those are the persons present. You can see here on the left-hand side, Kruger, Steyn, Jacobs, Skalkburger, and Grobler at Machadodorp, Botha, Meyer, Reitz, and Ben Viljoen. Those are telegrams. Right. Now what happened is Botha briefly told Kruger the British made a breakthrough and they'll have to retire. That same evening, ladies and gentlemen, Kruger knew that his stay in the Transvaal was something of a past, that his days was numbered, that he had to go to Europe. The next morning on that station, and that's another reason why you have to pay a visit to Waterval onder, something very important happened. The Transvaal and Free State governments, Paul Kruger and President Steyn, met there on the station and decided, one, to switch to guerrilla warfare. So that alone makes it worth a visit. The second one was that it was decided Kruger, because of his age, should go to Europe. But that was kept quiet, it was kept a secret. And the third one, for those of you still interested in the Kruger millions, it was decided to move the seat of government to Nelspruit. And now I must thank my mentor, who, 53 years ago, I was a first-year student of Professor Frans-Johan Pretorius at Tukkies. But he came up, no applause. No, next year, January, it would be 60 years ago that I, as a 12-year-old boy, walked into the grounds of office. And there in his prefect blazer, waiting to ontgroen my, that same person. You can confirm it afterwards with him. Now, okay, ladies and gentlemen, right. You must remember that morning, we're speaking about Tuesday, the 28th of August. There they are at Waterval onder station, both governments, but there were also hundreds of Boers who were retiring from the Battle of Bergendal. What did they see? And this is what I owe to Professor Pretorius. Railway wagons loaded with chests, allegedly full of gold. And so the rumor arose that Kruger had taken the Kruger millions to Lorenzo Marx and Europe. Rumors also abounded that the gold packed in chests had been buried somewhere in the eastern Transvaal bushveld. Many people had indeed seen that the gold train later went further down into the mountains to Nelspruit, and few people knew the fate of the remaining stock. This photo that you see there, ladies and gentlemen, it's not taken at Machadodorp. It was taken at Waterval Onder, and I think that gives you a very good idea of what it looked like that morning. Right, that same morning, the government, the train, with Kruger and Steyn and the rest of the Transvaal and Free State government departed to Nelspruit. And now we come, you can see at Nelspruit. And now we come to a vital piece of evidence. That evening, remember, they departed that morning after taking all those very important decisions. Now that evening, we find the key to the missing Kruger millions. In Nelspruit, the Transvaal government met later the same day to discuss the situation. The meeting, chaired by Paul Kruger, consisted of Skalk Burger, Generaal Lucas Meyer, State Secretary Reitz, Assistant State Secretary Jacobs, and Treasurer General Nicolaas Malherbe. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you must listen carefully. On the agenda was the destination of the remaining stock of raw gold, approximately 64,000 ounces, valued at 225,000 pounds, that Smuts had removed from a statement. The gold could not be used between May and August 1900 to pay creditors or to give to commandos, because it was unprocessed. It was raw gold. Before the council was a confidential written offer dated the 23rd of August from the German firm Wilken and Ackermann of Lorenzo Marx, suppliers to the government, to purchase the gold for minted money. The council discussed the proposal as well as a draft contract submitted by the Treasurer General and decided to approve it. Two days later, on the 30th of August, the train with the gold departed from Nelspruit for Delagoa Bay. Accompanying the cargo, consisting of 62 chests, was Meindert Noem, a clerk in the Auditor General's department. Now I'm going to read you from Noem's notebook, diary. 30th of August, arrive at Hector Spruit, arrive Komatipoort 10 minutes before 5. On the next day, a Friday, the destination was reached and Noem began delivering the gold to Wilken and Ackermann in Lorenzo Marx. Noem's notebook, 31st, Friday, busy delivering gold at Wilken and Ackermann. First Saturday, been out fishing with Mr. Ackermann. 3rd September, reads, busy with gold again. Later he notes briefly, 62 chests, price 79 shillings 6 penny per ounce. Wilken and Ackermann took 75,000 pounds of the gold as payment for food supplies they had provided to the Transvaal Republic, and the rest, valued at 150,000 pounds, was repacked into 30 chests and shipped on the Bundesrat, a ship of a German East African line, to the German firm Arndt and Cohn in Hamburg. Now, important, ladies and gentlemen, with the completion of Noem's mission to Lorenzo Marx, the gold matter, as far as the Transvaal was concerned, seemed to be concluded. But during Noom's visit to Lorenzo Marx, there was a dramatic turn of events in the Anglo-Boer War. On the 1st of September, Lord Roberts annexed the Transvaal Republic as a Transvaal colony. On the 3rd September, Kruger, with a counter-proclamation, repudiated Roberts' annexation and declared the Transvaal intention to continue fighting for their independence. At this stage, Roberts and the British government were still under the impression that the Kruger millions were in Nelspruit. The rumor that Paul Kruger had fled abroad with a large quantity of gold flared up again shortly after Noom's return to Nelspruit. On 10 September 1900, the Transvaal government announced that 6 months' leave had been granted to President Creer to promote the Boers' cause in Europe. A tearful Kruger took leave on the morning of 11 September at Hectorspruit, which you see there, of Steyn, Louis Botha and the Transvaal government, and later that afternoon crossed the border at Komatipoort. News of Kruger's arrival in Lorenzo Marx on the night of 11 September once again sparked the rumor that he had fled abroad with the Transvaal gold. Consul General Crowe on the 18th September reported to Lord Salisbury, "There is a large quantity of gold here, ownership of which it is impossible for me to prove. I cannot prevent shipment unless instructed by the Foreign Office to bring requisite pressure to bear on the Portuguese authorities to detain it until question of legality is beyond dispute." The Foreign Office, however, did not see its way clear to do this. As is well known, the youthful Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands, with British permission, sent the Gelderland to Lorenzo Marx. Kruger boarded on 19 October and departed for Europe the next day, where he died in July 1904. Kruger's departure from Delagoa Bay was not, however, the end of a Transvaal involvement with the gold removed from the mint. As mentioned, the gold was shipped on the Bundesrat to Hamburg. Even before the Bundesrat arrived in Hamburg, German creditors of the Transvaal government, under the impression that the 30 chests of gold were the presumed property of the Transvaal government, obtained a court order to seize the gold. The gold was placed in the custody of a Norddeutsche Bank in Hamburg. Arendt and Cohn appealed to Dr. Leitz, the Transvaal foreign envoy in Brussels, for help. Leitz, however, had no knowledge of the gold or the transaction with Wilken and Ackerman. Although the gold was eventually returned to Arendt and Cohn, the entire matter was only finalized in 1902. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Kruger millions went to Europe. Perhaps we should have Kruger's right-hand man, Dr. W.J. Leitz, have the last word. In a letter dated 1st September 1927 to Dr. Keet, he supplied a short memorandum on the Kruger millions, and therein he states the following. The so-called Kruger millions are so-called because it was believed Kruger had sent or taken funds to Europe at the outbreak of the war. This is entirely incorrect. Kruger sent or took no funds at all. All the money invested in Europe was already there when the war broke out. Right, ladies and gentlemen, my final story. I told you right at the beginning I'm going to disclose where the Kruger millions are. Now, the real Kruger millions, I want to take you back to that photograph of Waterval Onder, that train, that trucks loaded full of gold, etc. What it was loaded with, ladies and gentlemen, was the documents of a Transvaal government. Leitz had started early in 1900 with the help of State Secretary Reitz to sent documents to Lorenzo Marx. And eventually, all those documents ended up in Europe with Leitz. There you can see on the right-hand side, Leitz correspondence, but the real Kruger millions is on the left-hand side, you can see a volume, is the more than 1,000 volumes in the Leitz archive, in the state archives. I remember as a young student, and I'm nearly finished, 1976, early March, with my study leader, going to the Union buildings. The archives were located there, and to register my subject. It was about the Transvaal consul in Lorenzo Marx, so that's where my fascination with Lorenzo Marx started. But he took us down into the basement of a Union building, and there was these massive wrought iron gates. On top of it, Dr. W.J. Leitz Archief. That was one of his conditions when he sent it back. And I'm going to end, ladies and gentlemen, those documents, as you can see, more than 1,000 of them, were sent back more than 30 years after the Anglo-Boer War. And they were returned to state archives, where a 29-year-old archivist, one D.W. Kruger, curated them in the Leitz archive in the basement of the Union building. Today, ladies and gentlemen, virtually all documentation of the Transvaal Republic during the Anglo-Boer War resides in the Leitz archive. I would therefore advise all prospective treasure hunters to pay a visit to the state archives to get to know the Leitz collection more closely. You will not be sorry. Thank you.